And we're live. And I ain't gonna lie, I don't know if we're gonna be on here all day or not. Um, oh, goody, my camera's starting to jump already. But
Anyhow,
good morning. It's Brushfire Mind. It's Monday morning. Good Lord, it's been a long weekend and a long week. And y'all, I don't want to talk about the riots. I don't want to talk about the racism. I don't want to talk about it. But
Molyneux said that exploring these subjects is mentally exhausting for people with any virtue.
and that's correct. Um, you'll notice that the press loves to talk about these topics.
But I repeat myself.
Hmm. Um, doesn't seem to bother him at all to talk about these topics. But it's Me More Monday, and part of any conflict in the modern era, fourth generation or fifth generation warfare, is going to be information warfare and psychological warfare.
Whoa.
Yeah, not off to a great start this morning. I'm tired, guys. And I've only been up since about 4. Uh, here's the one we want to talk about today. We had to grab a version of it from that.
That's
Y'all,
super racist.
oh my God, y'all remember her MTV videos? Just every episode is some version of white people evil because. Okay,
The patriarchy because,
yeah.
feminism because, intersectionality because.
So this is the. Here she's comparing the armed protesters in Michigan who were protesting over the lockdown to the protesters. This is a lie. Placing this pair of
Protesters.
images next to each other is a lie. Francesca, you're a liar. Because there is a key difference here. The conservative armed white protesters, and I mentioned that they were white because, for one, it's part of the narrative, and for two, I'm going to dispel that because that is also not true. That some of them were white is true. But to say that all of the armed protesters in Michigan were white is as true as saying that all of the rioters in 23 cities that are currently on fire are black. If you were to say that all of the protesters that are burning down the country are black, you would also be lying. You wouldn't be mistaken. You'd be lying because there is not a reasonable circumstance under which you could believe that they're all black.
Yeah, I mean, according to some of the liberal governors, these riots are actually being instigated by white supremacist groups that are attempting to spark the race war.
And according to some other outlets, there are several theories on this. There's and amusingly, none of them include that these are spontaneous outrage mobs responding to George Floyd's death. Oh, wait, what's that? It's 4 minutes in, and I mentioned the death of a black man at the hands of a white cop. Um, and oh, wait a minute. Funny story about that. Damn, I just saw a meme about that just a minute ago that I wanted to share, and I forgot to save it up. See if
Whoops.
I can stumble across it real quick while I mention it. But there were 4 ethnically diverse officers involved in George Floyd's death. 3 of whom were non-white cops, that didn't stop it from happening.
Now that I didn't know. I knew that Officer Niels on Neck was white, and I knew Officer Short Round was some type of Asian, but I haven't seen the the faces of the other two cops that were kneeling on George Floyd. And yes, there were three cops on top of George Floyd, not just one. Just so that we're totally crystal on that.
Right.
But here's the thing, okay, and it can't be overstated. Um, the protesters in Michigan, where they show you the scariest picture they can find, and then the protesters from other parts of the country, where they show you the most sympathetic image they can find. Um, Dudes in Michigan did not riot. In fact, everything they did was completely on the up and up. They don't tell you about the fact that every single one of them voluntarily submitted to a temperature check before they were allowed in the Capitol, and that it is, in fact, totally legal in Michigan to open carry in the Capitol. In fact, with a lot of rifles in particular, the laws in most states say you must open carry your rifle. The reason why a sawed-off shotgun is illegal is because you can conceal it, and you're not supposed to be able to.
Well, the reason the sawed-off shotgun is illegal is because our federal government has no respect for the Constitution. But the the cited the cited logic is related to the concealment of the weapon.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
I had to dad real quick. Did you like how I hit that mute button?
Yeah, yeah. The cough button, it works. Um. So, oh, God, there's so much to go into here. Okay, one thing I want to deal with. I've been noticing on my Facebook page, and honestly, I'm trying not to make a lot of commentary on this on my personal Facebook page because turns out I'm I know a lot of people who are just virulent, violent racists, and I'm a little bit worried about how they're going to respond to me having an opinion on the matter, um, because so many of them just knee jerk to the side of George Floyd and ran with the narrative that this is an innocent black man that was murdered without provocation. And and I keep seeing things like, "Oh, this man was murdered over a counterfeit $20 bill. Nobody deserves to die. That's not a crime that anybody deserves to die over." Okay. There's a lot of lies in that sentence. There's a lot of lies in that sentence. Here it is. The statement, "no one deserves to die over a counterfeit $20 bill," is false. Now, is it that I am saying that people counterfeiting $20 bills should be executed for that crime? No. But the statement that a crime which does not require the death penalty should never end in one's death is necessarily false, because if there is not a circumstance under which the continued resistance to law enforcement does not end in your death, then there is no law enforcement. So here's how it goes. The cops come to arrest you for your counterfeit money, and you refuse to be arrested. Now, let's say you manage to get loose and run off. Or let's say you actually get arrested. Okay, you get loose, run off, you get away safe. You are now a fugitive from the law. If the rest of the scenario ends in your death, it is not because you counterfeited a $20 bill, it is because you committed an additional crime after that. There were 3 cops on George Floyd's back. I dare you to find me a cop that doesn't say a sentence somewhat equivalent to, "you don't end up on the ground with 3 cops on your back unless you were resisting." So if someone said, if you hear the words or see the words written or uttered that George Floyd was killed over a counterfeit $20 bill, that is a lie. It is not a mistake. It is not a misunderstanding. It is not incorrect. It is a deliberate falsehood. It is a lie. Every criminal infraction must necessarily have the possibility of ending in death, assuming continued resistance. If lethal force is not a pace of escalation toward which every crime can ascend, then it is not a crime. If no crimes justify death, then there are no laws. Because the only punishment that can be involuntary is death. If you are fined, you can not pay the fine. If the result of not paying the fine is that you go to prison, you can refuse to go to prison. And I'm not saying that it's legal to do these things. It is physically possible to do these things. If you're sentenced to prison for refusing to pay a fine and you refuse to go, eventually, you're going to find yourself using violence against police officers who are attempting to enforce the law, and the result will be, unless you are successful in killing those police officers in order to evade the sentence that you've been issued, it will be that you die as a result of having fought the police. And
real quick, brother,
and to be very clear, I am not saying that the police in this situation were correct. I'm not saying that Davin, or whatever his name is, was right to kill George Floyd. But to say that that's not a possibility is false.
Morning. Bruno the Doberman is in the chats, and he says, "Hi, they hate us." Can you expand on that? Who hates who? Just, I have a pretty good idea, but if we're going to discuss it, we want to make 100% crystal clear here. And while we're waiting on you to respond, there's some other things, and we made predictions on this channel that went something to the effect of, even if the cops are wrong, there's going to be a lot more to the story that comes out because of the resisting of arrest and whatnot. So the preliminary autopsy findings have been released, and the headlines from it are that
we
it
were
appears...
right. Our predictions were dead nuts. That's what the headline is.
Well, this is still the preliminary, okay? So this is not the final report. But the preliminary report basically says that Floyd died of a combination of stress, heart disease, and potential intoxication, which means not asphyxiation. Now, look, if you want to say that having 3 cops sit on top of you and one of them sitting on your neck is a contributing factor to that stress, that's fine. That's, I'll have that talk with you. And George Floyd's family attorney is requesting an independent autopsy review. I realize why that's happening, and I even think that that's something that has the potential to be a weapon that gets used against us, because please believe 2 doctors can look at the same thing and come away with slightly different conclusions.
Yeah, and it's a perfectly reasonable request from George Floyd's attorney. Look, no matter what your position on, no matter what you think about the evidence that's been presented, it would be irresponsible. He would be in legal malpractice, frankly, if he did not request that independent autopsy at this point.
Okay, so Bruno says the cop was wrong, but the yams should not burn the cities. I don't know if that's a slur or a joke or just slang I don't know about. And it says Antifa helped them. Yes, we're coming back around to that. We're just setting the table with all the memes and the stuff. So there's that. So there is, at the very least, that George Floyd's death, at the very least, at this point, could accurately be described as a combination of factors. Um, oh well, yeah. Now, do we'll come back to that, Bruno. Um, Also, with regard to Floyd's death, the one officer has been charged, and he's been charged with third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. And okay, wow. Uh, we'll still come back to it. Thanks, Bruno. You just gave us a good chuckle. anyhow, anyhow, third degree murder. Most states don't even have a third degree murder statute. First degree murder is your classic cold blooded, premeditated murder. I decide to kill you today and then I kill you later today or tomorrow. And, maybe it's because I hate you, or maybe it's because I want to steal your stuff, or maybe I'm just trying to assassinate you, whatever. That's your first degree murder. Your second degree murder is your crime of passion. You come home, you find your spouse in bed with the pool boy, and you just freak out and beat them both to death. That's your second degree murder. Third degree murder has got two primary components. One is, thanks for the
Oh, go ahead,
share,
Kim.
buddy.
Go,
Um,
go ahead.
Third degree murder has two primary components. One, you cause the death of another individual while you're committing a crime. So if I'm trying to steal a car, I crash the car and accidentally kill a little old lady in her Prius, I can be charged with third degree murder. I was committing a crime, stole a car, killed somebody. Third degree murder also has a potential element of malice. So let's say I was really furious at Chris for whatever reason, and I decided that I was going to beat the absolute hell out of him, and I waited for him in a dark alleyway and knocked him over the back of the head with a sock full of quarters and beat the piss out of him, and then he dies of his injuries. Well, that can be third degree murder because I was trying to hurt him. And they're going to have a hard time making third degree murder stick. And I'm really worried that these riots are going to happen all over again as a result of it. Second degree manslaughter, I've also read up on. And basically, second degree manslaughter might stick because it includes an element of a reckless disregard. And I think it's possible to argue that the cops had a reckless disregard for Floyd's safety. I think you could make that point. Most cops who watch the video say something like this: the cops were wrong in the arrest, they took it too far, but you don't end up on the ground with multiple cops sitting on top of you unless you were resisting arrest. So you kind of got this push and pull back and forth between the 2 points. So we use that slang. It will go on all summer. God, Bruno, I hope you're wrong about the riots because we, we the, I'm going to disagree. The riots won't go on all summer. They will
Sure, they
end
will.
before
They'll
that.
end as soon as the election is done.
Ooh, zing. So, but going back to the original meme that we were talking about, and even kind of comparing it, I've seen the memes that
Yes,
say,
yes, Bruno, I am your friend.
going going back to the original
도한
meme,
도한 네가 친구게 제가 이거.
going back to the original meme that was shared from Miss Francesca's page. I've seen other ones that come from people like her that say, "Hey, well, the Boston Tea Party, man, they did destruction of property there." It's like they only committed destruction of property on the merchant ships. They didn't sink the merchant ships. They destroyed the tea. And they
Explicitly,
certainly did.
and the tea was the explicit point of the protest. The tax on the tea and the destruction of the tea was explicitly because this is the offending product. Um, like I hate to say it, I'm gonna say this and it is a dangerous statement to make, but it is absolutely correct. It would be more appropriate for these rioters to be burning down explicitly police stations. That would be more appropriate to the context as a protest. I am not saying that is correct to do. I'm not saying that is what should be done. But given the
No, but in
context
context.
of the
Hmm.
protest, it is not useful, uh, intelligible, or appropriate to be destroying businesses, small or otherwise. Okay, Louis Vuitton's loaded, but how does stealing purses express your outrage at police brutality? And if you are outraged black about white on black police brutality and making the claim that it is a disproportionate occurrence, you are wrong or a virulent, dishonest racist. It is simply factually not the case that white on black police brutality is a disproportionate occurrence. That's a false statement.
Good morning, Drew, who's popped up in the chat. Thank you very much, sir. Oh, yeah, Drew has a fantastic little sarcastic joke there. But I don't know what you guys are going to talk about this morning.
Yeah, and Drew, to your point, the protests that are happening in Atlanta and many, these are not protests, Drew, and they are not riots. This is an armed insurrection and should be responded to strategically and militarily as such. The uh, the so-called riots, no, these are armed insurrections. This is terrorism.
Yeah, and then that's gonna go back to the Antifa thing. But before we get there, can we make a quick stopover with the Jesus meme?
Yeah, you and your Jesus meme. Where did I put it?
Click, click.
You just sent the picture, so I'll just share that.
Okay, whatever.
That'll work.
Okay, this is a painting of Jesus flipping the tables in the temple, and I've noticed that, especially when you're dealing with some form of atheistic lefties, they love to throw the Bible up in your face when it's convenient. You know, don't don't use the Bible to tell me that a man should have his place and a woman should have his place. But when it's convenient for me, I'm going to take things in the Bible out of context. I'm going to throw it up in your face. And the caption that's often associated with this image goes something to the effect of, oh, Christians should understand that violent protest is legitimate according to Jesus. But again, this goes back to like the Boston Tea Party example. Jesus flipped over the tables. Jesus did not light the temple on fire. There's a big difference between those things. And if you know the Bible story, you could take it all in context. Uh, they were bringing animals inside the temple who were basically shitting on the floor of the temple, and they were
Like in
playing
San
fast and
Francisco.
loose. And they were playing fast and loose, so they're cheating people. So that's what Jesus
Like in
did.
Los Angeles.
He right,
I can
right.
do this all
But
day.
that's who Jesus in the story was going after. Was the actual bad guys, and that even goes back to Chris's point. If you want to take this in context, going after government institutions, specifically the police, is at least appropriate. But going after Starbucks and McDonald's and Target, like that's Starbucks didn't have anything to do with this. In fact, a lot of these bigger corporations have a tendency to track leftward, at least publicly, as they become large corporations. So you're literally cutting your own throat here by attacking them.
Yeah, hey, maybe the right answer, maybe the right thing for America is just to let these protesters run with it and burn down Starbucks and Amazon and Google and CNN.
Oh God, yeah. I hate that it happened. I really do. But man, sometimes life has its own little ironies. Just mwah. Like the news network that I would argue that is the absolute most responsible for all of the mainstream narrative, as it were, was the one that the rioters attacked. That's just, I mean, I can't. Oh, the Babylon Bee. Fantastic satirical news
I love
site.
the Babylon Bee, but do you remember when the Babylon Bee was satire before they started being the most accurate reporting outlet in the world? You know,
But anyhow,
I think we might start doing a segment where we just pull up an article from the Bee and talk about how, even though it's presented as satire, it's actually the best hard hitting journalism on the planet.
yeah. So, anyhow, now that we got all that laid out, let's go back to Bruno's point about this being instigated by Antifa. Because the mysterious piles of bricks that show up at these locations. And according to Tim Pool, this is a thing that Antifa does. They they will rent a work van. They'll even put on like orange vests so they look like working men. They'll drop bricks off and then just and nobody even looks at them in a second eye. You see it with a second glance. You see a guy wearing a hard hat, orange vest, carrying construction materials. Well, that's the most normal thing in the world.
Yeah, this
Uh,
this isn't news, Cameron. This was part of the. It wasn't Flint. It was. This has been part of the protests basically since the beginning of Obama. Um, it's okay. So let's be clear about something. When when Barack Obama ran for office, the only thing he had as kind of a bullet point on a resume was the title community organizer. Okay?
well, no, he totally was extremely briefly involved in local politics in Chicago and was totally extremely briefly involved in national politics. And
So to be clear, when people like when Alinskyite terror associates like Barack Obama is with Bill Ayers and the like talk about being a community organizer, this is what they're talking about.
yeah, they'll tell you, oh no, it's peaceful. Well, a mob is peaceful until it's not. And
And okay, let me clean up a misunderstanding real quick on. So the First Amendment does not explicitly give you the right to protest. That is a right which we have, which is assumed through the language of the First and the 10th Amendment. The First Amendment, and the reason I'm getting to this is because there's something else there that's very important that's being just completely dismissed out of hand. And it's evidence that these are criminals and should be treated as such. The First Amendment starts with protecting. The first thing it does is not protect your right to religion, it prevents the state from establishing a religion. And then the second thing it does is protects you in the free exercise of your religion, followed by the freedom of the press and to peaceably assemble and speech and the redress of grievances. Now, often you'll hear people ask, "What are the five freedoms from the First Amendment?" And the answer that they're expecting is freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. There's actually six. There's actually six because it's the freedom, the first thing is that the government's prohibited from establishing a church. And the second thing is the freedom to express your own religion. But those aren't important to this conversation so much. But of those six, the freedom to assemble is not the same as the freedom to protest. And this is important because the freedom to assemble is the freedom to open a business and have people patronize your business, to build a church and have people attend the service as parishioners, to hold a concert and have people come and listen to music and pay for the privilege thereof, to anything where you have people gathering, and that includes gathering for the explicit purpose of plotting to overthrow the government, because on occasion the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots. It includes, by assumption, given the 10th Amendment protection against the federal government assuming authorities and powers not explicitly delegated to it through the prior documents and statements of the Constitution, to the states and to the people. If a power has not been delegated by the people to the state does not have that authority. If the power has not been delegated from the people to the state and then to the federal government, it does not have that authority. That power exists only in the hands of the people. Now, with that assembly, you also have the freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. A common thread in these protests is no such petition is issued. They don't start by going around to the community and assembling and writing a petition to send to the government for a redress of grievances. And there's a reason that they don't do that. The claim is that, in this case, the claim is that white racist police harm innocent black men at an alarmingly high rate, and that alarmingly high rate is disproportionately higher than the rate at which the same police harm white men. That is false. The reason they don't petition on this ground is because the data doesn't support their claims. And if the data doesn't support your claim, then the response to the petition is going to be, you're a liar, and we're not going to deal with you, you liar.
Okay, so good morning, Steve.
How you doing,
third
sugar?
Original member. Yeah, the third original member of the Brushfire Mind is in the comments. It's good to see him. And Drew, he's popped up in the comments. He wants to clarify that he's not talking about looters and rioters. He's talking about the people protesting peacefully during the day. And then he typed out, Chris, the right to protest is in the First Amendment. I think he typed that comment before he heard the rest of your explanation that the freedom to assemble is the springboard that gives you the ability to protest. So, and here's the thing, Drew. Peaceful protest in and of itself, sure, all you want, all day long, that's not a problem. But there's basically two pieces to it. A good number of these protests are not remaining peaceful. And given the way all of this has shaken
23 cities are on fire.
And given the way all this has shaken out, the fact that you've got mysterious people in black smashing windows in order to kickstart the riot and stuff like that, I think maybe there's a large number of the protesters themselves that intend for this to be peaceful protest, but I have a hard time believing that the organizers. Whoa!
Sorry about that.
That the organizers of this protest, that they want for them to remain peaceful. So there's that. And then just the other thing that I want to touch on is this narrative that it's white supremacists trying to turn these things ugly, and it's Antifa trying to turn these things ugly. If I had to pick between one of the two, I'm
Wait,
more
wait, wait, wait,
likely
wait,
to.
wait. If I had to pick between one of these two left-wing extreme groups,
If I had to pick between one of the two, I'd say that it's Antifa because there's documented history of them attempting to. Oh, well, fair enough, Drew. Please. Drew says, Chris,
no,
I'm going to
just
respectfully
keep
disagree.
going. We'll get back to we can come back to it later, but just keep going. We say, Drew, I don't mean to be dismissive, but we can't stop for every comment. Cameron, keep rocking.
Fair enough. Okay, so I just like to stop for the ones that disagree. Those are the most fun.
Okay,
Anyhow,
fine. So the First Amendment guarantees you the right to assemble peacefully, and it guarantees you the right to the freedom of speech. A peaceful protest is an expression of those combined rights. The protest, the the actual protestation is not explicitly outlined in the First Amendment, and part of that is the founding fathers they did not expect people to just assemble and make protest. They expect you to be informed civil operators who assemble, use your freedom of speech to discuss, to argue, and to generate a reasonable petition, and then to send that petition to the government. That's why that's my point. The right to protest is not one that is explicitly guaranteed by the Constitution. It is one that is implicitly assumed from a combination, a composite of the rights that we have. So yes.
so anyhow, back to the if I had to pick between Antifa and white supremacists, I'm going to pick Antifa. It's been documented. This is the thing that they do, and so forth and so on. But there's a really, really, really simple world. Well, I say simple, but it's possible that it's a bit of both. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say that it is probable that it's a bit of both. So, President Trump says that Antifa is a terrorist organization. Now, when I first heard this, I was like, yeah, it's about damn time. However, something has occurred to me. How far away are we from a president saying that the NRA is a terrorist organization, that the Tea Party is a terrorist organization? Steve
Now,
Steve makes a comment about the
in
saddest thing
fairness,
being
go ahead.
well. See, and Steve makes a comment about the saddest thing is that the real data shows the whole spectrum that's seldom reported on, and that's just the thing. People are already rioting over a false narrative. We're not talking about general police brutality. We're not talking about actual governmental overreach. People are rioting over a racist narrative that doesn't exist. Well, how big of a leap is it for there to be a segment of the population that says, oh my God, I feel like the NRA is a terrorist organization? And that eventually translates into the NRA being declared a terrorist organization.
You mean something like this?
Yeah, that specifically. And Drew, you're right. The peaceful protests are the ones that tend to happen in daylight hours. The cowards do it at night because they're a whole lot harder to track and arrest, so they can get away with their bullshit. But that's excellent cover. Plus, you send people out onto the streets at 4 p.m. and you whip the crowd into a frenzy. You whip them into a frenzy. You whip them into a frenzy. And then some 8 hours later at midnight, you throw the first Molotov cocktail, and these people have been on the streets for hours, getting more and more and more angry. I mean, that's got riot written all over it. That's why I'm saying I don't even necessarily believe that the organizers of these protests intend for them to stay peaceful, because I've done the Tea Party thing. I've done it a bunch, and not a damn one of them turned into something violent. Not even close. You getting caught up on comments there, buddy?
Yeah. I
Gotcha.
think, yeah, we're good. Okay.
Well, even the police incidents themselves, according to the FBI's data, um, and I'm going to use rough, easy numbers here just to make it simple. Um, but Black people make up about 13% of the population. They comprise 50% of felony arrests, but they only make up 25% of lethal encounters with the police. So if you're a Black person and you're more likely to get shot to death, beat to death, whatever by the cops, you would at the very least have to maintain that same 50% threshold. It's actually white people, proportionally speaking, that have more lethal encounters with the police than any other group. And yeah, yeah. And you want to talk about that? Well, man, that's a whole separate set of problems. Wait a minute, because you could infer from that data, do we treat Black people with kid gloves? Do we have the
Yes.
bigotry of soft expectations baked right into our communities with
And
regard to policing?
the police do and will continue to. One thing we're going to see following these riots is a rise in violent crimes committed by minorities because there is now a fear among the police, and that fear has been growing. And that has been happening year over year. The police are more and more treating minorities with kid gloves because they're scared to death that they're going to be the cop that sets off the next riot.
It's part of why my dad retired when he did. He actually really enjoyed being a police officer. He enjoyed helping people that needed help and locking people up that needed to be locked up. And he was even able to compartmentalize the fact that sometimes the best he could do is take a bad guy off the streets for 24 hours, and that was as good as it was going to get. He still counted that as a win. And however, given the climate that we live in, ooh, I don't know what happened there, but I can't read the comments anymore. But given the climate that we live
Really?
in, yeah, I don't know. Just could be some. Oh, Parnell Jenkins says George Floyd RIP revenge. I'm not entirely sure which direction to take that
And
particular
don't
comment,
worry about
but
it. Just keep moving.
appreciate the engagement. But that's part of why he retired. He saw this coming. He knew the day was fast approaching where um, law enforcement was going to essentially be hamstrung. He told me once that while he thought body cameras were a good idea, and in fact, there would be a whole lot more clean arrests that would result from body cameras. Because what happens when there's no body camera? The cop says one thing, the potential perp says another thing, and then there's enough gray area to let the perp slide through. Well, if it's on the body camera, no, 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 this cop tackled you because you resisted arrest. Well, now that gray area doesn't exist. But he pointed out to me that what was
And
going to
real quick,
happen.
hang on the body cams, real quick. The funny thing about the body cams is after the body cams became a thing, the statistics didn't change, which tells us that once we got the body cams in the field, what we learned is we didn't have a whole lot of bad cops. We had a whole lot of criminals that are willing to lie to try and get the cop in trouble and try to get themselves off a crime, which surprised not one thinking person.
Right, right. But one of the other things that he pointed out with regard to the body cams is that going forward, what would eventually happen is if a body cam was damaged during some type of altercation and there was no body cam footage available, it would be assumed that the cop had done something wrong and they'd sabotaged their own body camera so they could get away with doing something wrong. And he didn't want to have anything to do with that world, not at all.
And uh, another thing about the body cams, we've said what we've said about the George Floyd arrest, and one of the things that we've pointed out is all of the video that has been released on the George Floyd arrest has been the most damning possible video. But you got 4 cops there wearing body cameras. Do you think for one moment, if those 4 body cameras told the same story that is being told through the selective release of specific video, that we wouldn't have those on every major outlet everywhere? If the body cam videos told the story that 4 white cops murdered an innocent black man, those body cam videos would be everywhere. And
It'd be all over Facebook and Twitter.
You have not seen them. And there's there's one thing there at least, that the story that those 4 body cams tell is, we're not talking about 4 white cops. For one. No matter what else the story tell, those body cams tell us. Let me see if I can pull up the 4 officers real quick.
It needs to be quick.
Yeah, but why? Because we're at 46 minutes out?
Yeah. Yeah, normally we legit try and keep this to between 20 and 25 minutes, but there's been a lot of craziness.
There's a surprising shortage of images of the 4 officers.
Gee, I wonder why that is. But you can even see in the video that we've all seen that the one cop on crowd control is Asian. So at least one of the 4 was, in fact, not white.
Kind of bites into the narrative. Wow.
Now, James makes an interesting point and says you haven't seen them because they're too damning. The agents of the state, he says they are agents of the state regardless of their race. It appears part of what he means is, just like every tribe has a tendency to protect their own tribe, it seems as though what he's saying is that the cops are looking out for the other cops, and this video hasn't been released because cops are going to look out for cops. And
well, here's one.
So Steve has us in the thread saying it's 2 white, 1 Asian, 1 black.
Yep.
So it's not 4 white cops.
Correct. And I saw something that claimed that one of the 2 white was Hispanic or something. I guess he's another
George
Zimmerman. he was Hispanic every day of his life until he shot a black kid. And James, yeah, agents of the state. But here's the thing, James, if that's part of the narrative, then that this is an ethnically diverse group of murder cops is actually something that helps the narrative of the agents of the state against the claim that all white police officers are racist monsters. You'd think if this was a race issue, the black guy that handcuffed Floyd to begin with might have had some. Hey, brother, you're going a little too far there. You're killing this brother. You need to knock that shit off. And apparently, that didn't happen. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. We're getting there, but let me just kind of bring it all together. Here's where I think we are. This was a bad arrest.
Yep.
Floyd was not killed over a $20 check. Or a $20 bill. Floyd was not killed over the crime of counterfeiting. He was killed when he resisted the police. To claim murder is false because Floyd did not die at the scene. He died in the hospital later. He died in the hospital later of injuries other than having a knee on his neck, which is a standard operating procedure for this police department and is not a lethal restraint means of restraint. Okay? I know how that video looks to a bunch of civilians who have never fought a large man on drugs for the sake of their own lives. I still think it's a bad arrest, but to jump to murder is false. Okay? Yes, I think the officer on the neck should go through the process. Should be tried and, if appropriate, convicted.
Yeah, based on reading Manslaughter 2, there's a good chance that actually sticks. Murder 3 will never stick. James says, so stop pushing that. No. They charged him with Murder 3 and Manslaughter 2.
I thought you. Okay. Yes. Murder 3 might stick. Murder 1 never. Manslaughter, almost a slam dunk.
I don't even think Murder 3 will stick, because you got to be able to prove they were committing an illegal act, and they're arresting him, which is their job. He had no pulse in the ambulance.
I did not say. In fact, I've said the exact explicit opposite. I did not say that the arrest situation was not a contributing factor. The more probable case is that the stress of that arrest exacerbated his existing heart disease, which was already exacerbated by his use of crack cocaine, and that is what led to his death. So let me ask you this, James: if the arrest is a contributing factor and not the explicit direct cause of death, then is it the case now that in every arrest, before they even try to put the cuffs on you, the police have to announce, "Hi, we're the police. We're here to arrest you. Here are your Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent, blah, 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 blah. Now, would you please fill out this waiver explaining any pre-existing underlying health conditions that we might need to take into consideration when you begin to violently assault us, as is our reasonable expectation given your prior armed felony convictions?"
And we don't know that he had no pulse in the ambulance. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. If it comes out later that he had no pulse in the ambulance, we are more than happy to amend our statements and say we were wrong. In fact, we prefer to be wrong, and we'd rather you see us be wrong. That way we all get to learn something together. And Steve's asking about toxicology. The preliminary report has been released, and I stress it's the preliminary report, but the preliminary report suggests that it was a combination of stress, heart disease, and potential intoxication. And that is the preliminary report.
And in fairness, when I said crack cocaine, that's an assumption that I'm making based on the preliminary autopsy, including a toxicology screen that appears to be inculpatory, and that we know him to have a history of crack cocaine from his criminal records and from statements made by his associates at the scene.
James says, show the proof of the altercation.
And that was my point. It is reasonable to assume that there is proof of the altercation prior to the arrest because we haven't seen the body cameras. If the body cameras did not include that exculpatory information on behalf of the officers, why would that? If those body cameras told the story, these men murdered this guy without provocation, they would be absolutely every front page that you're looking at. They would be in your face everywhere. The only reason that they have not been released is because they will contain information that is deleterious to the narrative. If it were not the case that those cameras at least painted the cops in a less terrifying light than these are just ravenous murderers, you wouldn't be able to get away from them.
So I'm gonna go back to something that James is saying, show the proof of the altercation. Did they ask him to fill out a survey of drug use in order to determine the level of severity required? There's a couple of things there. We have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. We can watch the video and realize somewhere in that video he quit struggling and the cops don't get off of him, and that's probably a contributing factor to his death. But I actually watched the longer version of the video. I watched it several times and was as turned as critical of an eye to it as possible. Um, More than once, the cops try and ask him, "What are you on?" There's also somebody in the crowd later on in the video that actually says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, he's not on crack right now. He's not on crack right now." So there was at least one person in the crowd that knew him to consume crack cocaine. And then, as far as the evidence of the altercation itself, uh, the vast majority of cops say two things. They say, one, these cops fucked up. They say it, including my dad, who I've referenced in this show. But they also say things like, you just absolutely do not end up on the ground with multiple officers on top of you unless you're resisting. For better or worse, compliance is key. And this just doesn't happen without non-compliance. And I would even say, James, that it's entirely possible that, and yes, it's possible that it's so damning that nobody's ever going to see those body cam images. But
no, that's not possible.
Made an argument ad absurdum about them taking surveys. How about the other way around? Speak to cops. Eventually, one will tell you who they work for. Well, I have the benefit of my father having decades of LEO experience, and he would tell you that he was DeKalb County Sheriff, and he would tell you that he worked for DeKalb County, and that he and the vast majority of the officers that he worked with were absolutely 100% bought in to protect and serve. They wanted to help good people and hinder bad people. That is most police officers.
Well, okay, so what Boyd's getting, what James Boyd's getting at here, the because they're too damning to let the cops off. What he's accusing that there is a massive conspiracy of police to murder black people and to protect one another in the case that they do so, and so they want to keep the body cam footage because it's so damning. They want to keep that cam footage out of the press because it would prevent them from being able to save these cops from the law, from the consequences of the law for what they did.
I'm going to amend your accusation there because it seems to me more like it's not a race thing. It's more like the cops have the power and they're going to protect each other so they can maintain the power. Race doesn't seem to be a factor in what he's arguing here. Yeah, right there. The capacity for the state to cause extrajudicial death to negligence is concerning.
And I don't disagree with you on that point. But politics is force at its base level. And we are about to scrape 1 hour, so
this has to be it. We love you guys. Thanks. Please show back up tomorrow. Argue with us some more. But I literally have to walk out the door in about 10 minutes, or I am going to be like late.
All right, so we're gonna put a button it on there, but guys, we really appreciate the very lively chat this morning. I'll give you a great big hell yeah on that. And we'll see you tomorrow morning. Do us a favor. Help this channel grow. Like, share, subscribe. And leave a comment in the actual comments, not just on the live feed here. That's good for the algorithm. Helps us get some more voices. Helps get some more blood on here. And new blood is always good blood.
Right.
Unless it's lepers.
Yeah,
be careful
okay,
about lepers. And we'll see y'all tomorrow. Be safe out there. Try not to get shot. And Drew, I have not forgotten about our phone call at 2:30. I'll talk to you then, brother. Y'all be safe. We'll see you tomorrow.
Ooh, buddy. Dude, we might have to start going earlier.
Yeah. If we're going to do a 1 hour morning